If we don't find a way to fund education reform, this opportunity that we have will close, and we will find ourselves waiting another generation before we get another chance. And I just don't think that the people in the state of Washington are that patient. And I know I'm not. And every parent, every teacher, every school board director that I talk to, and I've talked to many of them, are of the same opinion. The time is now, and if we don't seize this opportunity, it will pass us by. As goes education, so goes the community, so goes the state, and so goes the nation. And currently, our education is being held together by duct tape and baling wire. And in the wake of the budget cuts that we've seen this year, last year, and other years, many districts are listing, taking on water, and some are at risk of running aground. Let's not forget why we're doing this. We are finding ourselves, as are our students, in an increasingly competitive environment. While our current education system is sputtering along, other nations are building speedboats, and they're catching up. The current plan for funding education seems to be hope that no more storms come along, churn the seas and create more and more waves, then use the sledgehammer of big state budgets to keep the system drifting along at its current rate. This just isn't the right approach. What we need is a holistic plan and a long-term approach to funding education, not an election term approach to funding education. What we need is a plan. And as it turns out, there is a plan. I've been working with lots of other education stakeholders to put together a plan that can create a long-term approach to funding education reforms found in 2261. There are two bills currently that would take a look at the plan. Those bills are House Bill 2746 and Senate Bill 6740. And just to give you a sense of the support that this idea has, the sponsors of the House bill are Representatives Hope from my 44th district up in Lake Stevens, Representative Priest, and Representative Sullivan. The Senate bill is sponsored by Senator Hobbs, again, my legislator. You know the mantra, work with your local legislators, and this is a great example of what you can do when you're sincere and when you make those efforts to do that. But it's not just Senator Hobbs. It's Senator Hobbs, Senator Rosemary McAuliffe, Senator Omig, Senator Gordon, and Senator Shin all sponsored the bill in the Senate. That's a good, for those of you who've been in education a lot longer than I have, I think you'll recognize those names and realize that this is not just one person's idea about what we can do about funding education. It's getting some traction, and that, I think the reason for that is because really, I wouldn't say that this is my plan. This is a plan that has been created and crafted by talking to every education stakeholder that I could find. And some folks who didn't want to talk to me, I went and found them anyway and talked to them. It's been a collective effort, and in fact, I'm going to tell you about the 5 tenets in just a minute. I started out with 4, and I went to one person who's very knowledgeable about education. I laid out these 4 tenets, and they said, well, what about this? And I said, well, that's a given, right? No, you need to add tenet number 5. So again, this is not just me, though I'm out there sticking my neck out and happy to do so. This has been a collective effort of the education stakeholders in our state, and I hope will continue to be so. Because just to clarify, the House bill and the Senate bill, they're companion bills, so they say essentially the same thing, set forth a mechanism to look at this plan, and if there's a better way to do it, to improve it or throw it out completely and find a better one. And if there is a better plan, I will be the first person to get behind it. So hopefully some of you are familiar with 2261. 2261 set forth a handful of working groups that were tasked with various elements of the reform. The first one was the Funding Formula Technical Working Group, and that group had 3 charges. One was to translate the formulas from the existing funding formula to the prototypical school model. The second was to provide some recommendations in how to implement that plan, and the third was to come up with some revenue options. There were 14 or so of us on that working group, and we did a lot of work, spent a lot of hours, and put together a recommendation that, as you've heard, the QEC was able to look at and then forward to the legislature. The working group for looking at a long-term funding education plan is not existent. There isn't one. There's a working group for the funding formula. There's a working group for data systems. There's a working group for compensation. There's a working group for local levies, but none for funding education with a long-term approach. These two bills would take the local levy funding program working group and expand its scope to look at how to create a long-term funding program. And so the plan that I've come up with help from others, is one of those plans that it's to look at and to consider. And it was the impetus for creating these bills. But my name's not in that plan or in that bill anywhere. And nowhere does it say you have to implement a specific plan. It just says, let's look at long-term funding, use this existing working group to do so, and then make recommendations to the QEC and to the legislature in a year. So simply put, a vote against these bills is a vote against looking at long-term funding solutions for K-12 education. So let me go through the 5 tenets of my plan real quick, and then just so you know, I will have a question and answer period tomorrow morning from 8 to 9:30, 90 minutes for those of you who don't have meetings during that time, at which point you can ask me anything about this plan. We can dive into detail. I have 300 handouts that have, please only take a couple, 300 handouts that go through the basics of each of these 5 tenets, and on the bottom has a box so that you can write personalized notes to your legislator in case he or she is interested in taking a look at this plan, or you can just use it for yourself to take notes. I also have plotter-sized, architectural-sized printouts of all of the data modeling for this plan that you can look at every single district, and the impact on that district is outlined for each of these 5 tenets in that plan. So the first